My name is Mualla, and I am pleased to kind of be the time monitor for this plenary session, which is very special for us. In this plenary, we have 4 colleagues from different parts of the world who will show us a glimpse of their commitment to hope-oriented teaching. They have been asked to tell a story of their vocation and profession as a religious educator in a complex world. Through their auto-mytho-biographical reflections, we are invited to ponder the intimate connection between personal vocational identity and hope-filled pursuits of the scholarship and praxis of teaching. I will present to you the 4 panelists in the order that they will speak. They have been invited to speak for about 10 minutes each, and then I will invite them to kind of freely respond to each other for a little bit, and then we will open up to engagement with you. They have authorized me to be brutally honest if they are running long, and I'll be brutal with this pink slip here. Give them the pink slip, and then also I'm also authorized to cut the power cord if they don't want to. Daniel said that. I didn't make that. Okay. All right. So, first up is Dr. Mualla Selçuk, our Vice President and Program Chair-elect of the Association. Dr. Selçuk is full professor of religious education at Ankara University School of Divinity. Currently Director of the Continuing Education Center, Mualla has also served as Dean of Faculty of Divinity, General Director for Religious Education in Schools for the Ministry of National Education. Among the many other national positions, Mualla was the first woman member of the Religious High Council for the Presidency of Religious Affairs in Turkey. Her research and writings focus on religious education in school and Islamic religious education in democratic cultures, interfaith religious education, and approaches to teaching from the Quran. Next will be Dr. Sarah Tauber, who is Assistant Professor of Jewish Education at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and a rabbinic candidate in the Jewish Renewal Network's rabbinic program. Sarah's trajectory as a teacher, writer, scholar, and activist in the world of education and Jewish community traces roots to her earliest learning experiences at a Jewish day school in Stamford, Connecticut, and to her family's experiences as Holocaust refugees and survivors from Poland. Her scholarship, or her career thus far, has included teaching in public schools of Berkeley, California, teaching leadership and community education in Paris and Geneva, and she currently is teaching in New York City at Jewish Theological Seminary and Union Theological Seminary. Third will be Daniel Moulin. Dr. Moulin is Research Fellow at the Institute for Culture and Society at the University of Navarra, Spain. He has research interests in philosophy of education, identity construction theory, character education, subject formation, sociology of religion, interreligious understanding. He has been after completing doctoral studies at Oxford, he went on to a postdoctoral excellence fellowship at the University of Geneva in the field of interreligious dialogue. He's currently working on a project about the Camino de Santiago, the schooling of Muslim students in Europe. And then finally, not least, Bernhard Grümme. We practice together. He is the Chair of Religious Education and Catechetics in the Faculty of Catholic Theology at REA Universitat Bochum, Germany. Right? Bernhard has worked as a school teacher for history and Catholic religion and has taught Catholic theology and education at the University for Education, Ludwigsburg. He is currently working on a book about heterogeneity as a challenge for religious education. Please help me welcome our panelists.
Hello, everybody. I want to greet you first with a verse from the Quran, when God says, "Who believe be God's helpers?" As when Jesus, the Son of Mary, said to his disciples, "Who are my helpers for God?" They said, "We shall be God's helpers." telling a story of my life as a religious educator who has been teaching religious education for 35 years in an Islamic society. A society with its struggle to honor individual differences and help its people to believe in themselves rather than see themselves through the patterns of the culture. A society with its hard struggle to promote gender equality. As a matter of fact, all individuals are equal without any discrimination before the law in my country, Turkey. However, women's rights are not commonly classified as human rights in practice, and women are still victims of discrimination at work, at home, and in the society. Women suffer violations of their human rights during their whole lives. At the same time, there are certainly things to celebrate, such as the overwhelming number of girls in school. Yet, if we look at the big picture, women still get a very raw view. Islam is condemned by some as blocking the way to women's rights. Some use poor status of women in Muslim society as justification for their reaction. Others derive conclusions from literal interpretation of the Quran, defining women as weak and inferior to men. Some depend on traditional perceptions which portray women as evil, intellectually incapable, even spiritually lacking. They find that female character is not so good for cases that require testimony or responsibility. At the same time, here also there are those who are not satisfied with the situation and oppose the culturally created forms of discrimination and feel responsible to overcome the barriers, yet they do not have a strong voice supporter religiously. As a Muslim religious educator, what is my role then in this depressing situation, which you might imagine that overruns my students' well-being and makes a tough mindset to penetrate? As a practicing Muslim woman and a lecturer of religious education, how passion fuels my commitment to manage this complexity of a patriarchal society. How I shift from the thoughts that weaken me to those that strengthen and raise my energy and give me hope. I will tell you my personal story before my professional life, because I believe that teachers' personal lives and professional lives are strongly connected. Like all of you, I have my story. Preparing this talk made me think about it from a different perspective. And I realized that my mom has taught me that what it likes to be a teacher in changing and challenging times. Having growing up at a time when girls were experiencing the very mishap of not going to school, as it was thought to be against Islamic beliefs, my mom had to leave school as a third grader in primary school upon my grandfather's decision. Never losing her love and passion for learning, she ended up waiting impatiently for me to come home from school so that I could tell her what I learned at school that day. It was from that moment that I came to realize the endless journey of learning. My mom remained like a student her entire life, open and willing to learn from everyone and anyone. When we came home from school, her question was not the usual question of, how was your day? But instead it was, what did you learn today? I was very keen on telling her my school day, unlike my sisters and brother. I loved telling her about my success, my failures, my frustrations, and being offended by school family. She was listening to me with an open heart, paying attention to my feelings, my anxiety of what has been done, and my worries about what might be. I remember some of her reactions as such. Stop focusing on these things that offend you, they only weaken you. Take stock of all that you learned at school today. Stop blaming others, your friends, your teachers. You can't go around being what other people think of you and become a good student, and then sometimes say, you are always valuable for me. I think more or less any grown-up or caregiver use some of these words talking with their kids. Above all, the one that shapes my life and helps me to feel a sense of hope, even in broken times, was this one. Always remember, every difficulty is a test and an opportunity. From time to time, I was thinking on how I could tell this apart, which was the test and which was the opportunity. I knew to some extent what test meant, at least from the test we got in school. But how could I see the opportunity in a difficulty? How shall I get here from there, and how will I know that I have arrived? I like thinking on the way returning home, thinking about what I learned and how to tell it to my mom, and I still how to use my feelings that my mom could understand me. It was easy to tell her the scores of my class, but it was hard to see the opportunity while I was rejected and not being appreciated. Then one day I asked her how to find opportunity in the difficulties I faced. She said, "Darling, just listen to your inner voice. God will help you." My mother used to use the word "Ya Fattah" as many times as needed to set order in chaotic situation of our family life, like the loss of my sister and the accident my brother had, and also to give thanks for grateful moments. Ya Fattah. What does Ya Fattah mean? Fattah is one of the name of God. Muslims have 99 names of God. 99 for all of our existence. Fattah means the reliever, the judge, the opener. Fattah is by whose guidance everything that is obscure is made manifest. Ya Fattah. I didn't remember more of this until I started my education at theology faculty. But I remember from time to time that I imitated my mother in some situation and I was saying, Ya Fattah. And then when I started my education at the theology faculty and recited the chapter in the Quran and in Shirah, which says, "And behold, with every hardship comes ease, verily with every hardship comes peace." I was impressed by the words. My mom's words came again in my mind. The combination of difficulty, task, and opportunity. In the following years, I worked on the 99 names of God in detail. The merciful, the peace, the great, the provider, the truth, the glorious, the friend, the guide, the light. I work on these names in terms of our existential relationship with God. I worked on the story of Abraham, a friend of God, a man of faith, who struggled to arrive at true belief to find the infinite and the beloved God, and not to adore which perishes. And I mastered the life of Prophet Muhammad as a lifelong educator, who is the best example for the Muslims. His words and deeds help us to think of how God flows through our being and enters our world. And I related myself to Rumi's word, which described a human being as a guest house. Embrace whatever and whoever comes with a sign or with a grace from beyond. Over time, I have developed a teaching philosophy aligned with this theology. They each have taught me the importance of framing a new vision of reality, to not be crushed by it, to not play the victim, and to not impose my expectation on it, but instead welcome it with a belief that there are new things in store for us all. I know it's not possible to think in every situation this way. We are human beings. We want a quick fix. We are impatient. We have our compulsive needs. We need control to get power, to win. We have our fears. We hold prejudice. We may fall into pride when all is well, and we can fall into depression easily when things do not go as we expect to be. I see many teachers enter schools with a strong passion for teaching, yet some survive and flourish, but others do not. Why? They find it hard to cope with this rapidly changing world of schools and classrooms, and to resist the challenges to their sense of well-being that may be imposed by policy, by pupils, by parents, the workplace, and other internal and external authorities. What is that keeps them believing and demonstrating daily that they can make a difference to the lives of this they teach? I see teachers' ability to present themselves through their authentic being. In other words, being confident with their own worldview plays a crucial role here. Being sure of what their worldview says and being sure of the things they hope for. A teacher educates primarily through her or his behavior, by her or his very being. Teaching methods, techniques, new approaches are fine, but they do not teach in themselves. It is the teacher who teaches. As the work of the teachers becomes more complex and thus more demanding, nurturing and generating hope, using my mother words, seeing things as a test and an opportunity, has become more central to the roles of teachers themselves and all those who are fully committed to their work. Generating hope is a critical factor of the teacher's professional identity. It is a hallmark. Moreover, it is a requirement. Yes, it is a requirement in my belief and in my religion. We learn it from the Quran when it tells about Joseph and all other search for in their journey. Hope is vital in sustaining commitment, both psychologically and socially, to manage the tension created by personal, professional, and context-specific situations. We learn from the Quran there is always a light of hope, even though it may involve struggle and pain. If I cannot see this light myself as a teacher, how can I expect my students to see it themselves? I am a human being. I am a long way from being perfect. I don't know always how to see this tiny ray of hope, but I do know that our worldview, our way of looking at things, our outlook on life will determine our way of generating hope. Be on the lookout to see God's bounty, to extend our gratitude, to live in appreciation. Give thanks for everything we are and everything we have. This is the way allows us to make conscious contact with the divine. That is the meaning of al-Fatah to me. This is my belief, and this is the way I generate hope. Do I succeed in creating hope with my students? I don't know. I don't know the answer, because my intention is not to dictate an end. My concern is helping my students to build their own worldview by the core values of the Quran and find out what it means to be a human. I consistently pray that my students would become open to God's grace as they explore their own journey, as they totally become themselves, not to fit themselves into patterns determined by others, not to hand out prepackaged thoughts, rather that their faith may deepen their personal growth and love be the root of their words and deeds, so that they enter either the classroom or the mosque, sure of their God-centered worldview, with their mature belief in God as a prime teacher of all faithful people. My mother, Edibe, you see the 3 generations in our family, has been my role model. Now she is in her late 70s, but look much more young. Thank you. Thank you for being my mom. Thank you for being my teacher. I am here with Religious Education Association Family now. I know this is going to be a test and opportunity. An opportunity to discover our common humanity beneath our differences. A place of commitment and celebration. a place of hope for a better world. I will be thinking, Mom, how to tell you what I learned from here on my long journey back home. In this sense, I hope to be your student for life. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here. It was wonderful to hear about a mother as a teacher, and there's a linkage because although I will make mention of my parents, the talk I'm about to give is about one of my teachers, and in some ways all of our teachers are our parents, even as our parents are our teachers. And you're going to hear about one of those teacher parents today who really, for me, embodies in so many ways the complexity of what it means to teach for, about, with hope in religious education and in the times that we're living in. A Confucian saying, not a Jewish saying, asserts that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I think that there's a great deal of truth in that statement. But I must say that it was serendipity that led me to sign up for Rabbi Neil Gilman's course on the images and metaphors of God in Jewish thought one spring semester many, many years ago, when I was a PhD student, not in theology or religion, but in Jewish history at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And paradoxically, as a student of Jewish history who was eager to understand how modernity had transformed Jewish life and Judaism, his course seemed on the surface to be outside of my range of academic priorities. And really to this day, I'm not quite sure, except for the fact that I got an exemption for a course, why I decided to spontaneously dash over to his class and arrived late to the room where there were only about 10 students, and all of them except me were rabbinical students. Needless to say, I can now honestly admit and affirm that that one semester as a student in Rabbi Gilman's class changed my life, the direction of my life, the internal understandings. And the hope that I'm able to bring today when I teach really traces in so many ways its sources to that turning point in the encounter between Rabbi Gilman, my teacher, a philosopher, and who I was at that point, and then moving forward. So just a little bit of personal history going back. Earlier, my parents are what we might call, or I might call, cultural Jews. Not particularly concerned with religion, narrowly understood, or maybe even broadly understood, but that's another conversation. Anyway, they sent me and they sent my brother to a modern Orthodox Jewish day school. Don't ask why, that's another conversation. But I, from that education, or from the age of 5 to 14, I really absorbed very definitive ideas about Judaism from rabbis who were passionate, and their teachings drew me to Judaism. They also generated a lot of inner turmoil for me. Why? Because these religious educators were suggesting that there was one good way, true way, right way to live an authentic Jewish life, a religious life, and it was very clear to me that that was not what my parents were doing. So there was a kind of schizophrenia in my existence. And as a result of that, during my later adolescence and early adulthood, I did need to distance myself from the theological messages and also the ritual practices that I had so much believed in and were so crucial to creating who I became as a young person. Fast forward many, many years, when I enrolled as a doctoral student in Jewish history at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I now teach, I really define myself, I would say, loosely, as a liberal progressive Jew. But while I wasn't quite religious or quite secular, having not really given that great analysis to it, I must say that I did sustain a fairly ambiguous relationship to all questions about belief, faith, and observance, and to the potential religious commitments that I think I knew inside of myself would result from any in-depth exploration of the interplay among those different categories. So instead, I placed my Jewish faith, if that's really the appropriate word, and I think at the time it was, in the study of history as a way of making sense of my personal trajectory as a Jew, of Jewish life, and of how my family story intersected with that of the climactic events in world history, and particularly in Jewish history, especially the Holocaust in my family's life. So while I had spent some time studying Jewish philosophy and Jewish religious thought as part of my course of study, I had not spent any time carefully and deeply delving into the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Siddur, the liturgical collection of wisdom that are part of the tradition. And this is what I was confronted in when I went into Rabbi Gilman's class. And in fact, maybe I shied away from that exploration because perhaps I was afraid of the powerful psychological, emotional, spiritual grip that I associated with my childhood immersion in Torah and in prayer at my Jewish day school. Now, Rabbi Gilman's approach to teaching this material and his manner of engaging the students really led me into an absolutely unanticipated confrontation with all of my dormant theological conflicts. I see this as hopeful because the ability to confront the ways that we have been influenced over the course of our earliest lives as children and our families, to do so in a place of both vulnerability and trust, and to be able to risk, is crucial to actually building a sense of hope in religious education and as part of being a teacher. So I can briefly tell you the moment when that came to a head was when Rabbi Gilman assigned or asked for all of us to sign up to teach the class about a specific subject and to trace the way the sources in the core texts of our tradition manifested themselves in worship, in liturgy, and practice. And so for some reason, I chose the binding of Isaac. That was the one, after all these years. And I know I chose it because he didn't assign any. So academically, that was not hard. I just ate it up. But, I'm going to get an A+ on this assignment. I can find all the sources. I can present. I have my scholarly persona in order to make sure that none of the rabbinical students knew that I was an imposter. So I did that. And I'm going on and on and on. It cuts me off. Like, it's going to happen here soon, probably. And he says, Sarah, this is great. This is good. But he also sounded a little impatient. He said, now, can you please tell us what you feel about the images of God in this passage? His Nazionist query, it shocked me. Right? My entire persona was about to collapse because of all the questions that I imagined a rabbi, a philosopher asking, this was not the one. And in my mind, as we all know, the questions that are coming up, have I ever been asked to articulate a personal feeling about how God was portrayed in Torah? No, couldn't remember. Had I ever been asked to publicly share my personal feelings about God? No, at least I couldn't remember. Would I have the courage to spontaneously answer this question in front of this teacher and in front of these rabbinical students who are my peers? And what I sensed was that if I truthfully answered, I'd be somehow shown to make that great leap of faith. And that is part of being hopeful in teaching, is to be able to make the great leap of faith without any absolutely preordained knowledge of how it's going to turn out. And I discovered as I continued learning with Rabbi Gilman that this ability to encourage learners to not stay intellectually detached from the material that they're studying, even as we're being intellectually rigorous, is crucial. And crucially, he himself did not stay intellectually detached. He shared his perplexities, his frustrations. And there's a name that I've given through my conversations with him and my observations of his teaching in other contexts and the time that I've spent with him. And he's housebound now because of very serious illness, and he's concerned that his teachings will die when he dies. And so part of being here is to share with you, in the hopeful way, his teachings that have now become part of my teaching. The term that I'm going to use here is paradoxical. It's called reverent irreverence. So if reverence is described as a feeling or attitude of deep respect tinged with awe and veneration, the dictionary sometimes ambiguously defines irreverence as the quality of being irreverent or lack of reverence. So that doesn't really help us too much. What I think it does convey, at least this term reverent irreverence, in the way that I am using it, is that a religious educator, such as my rabbi here, combines observance and ritual as elements that are essential to Jewish living, not only as a means of establishing order, cosmos out of chaos, but as a way to experience moments of awe and transcendence in their lives. But also, as a theologian and as a teacher, he never takes any part of that religious tradition for granted, including his own beliefs and practices. Doesn't act as an apologist for an ideological system to which we might devote our entire careers and our lives. Instead, reverent irreverence involves a rigorous and ongoing, if kind, interrogation of our personal theological beliefs and of our existential commitments. And that kind of reverent irreverence doesn't serve to undermine our commitments and our observances and our faith, but to nourish them. So that theological uncertainty, religious ambivalence, can be sources of strength and hope. And they are as far away from intellectual disingenuousness as we can imagine. For me, that a rabbi would frankly share his own theological dilemmas and how they relate to his existential conflicts and sufferings with students, it challenged me for the first time in my adult life to start considering honestly the tensions that animated my own internal contradictions about Judaism as a religious system, no less than how I chose to live as a Jew in the present. I'm going to offer a metaphor a little bit for what reverent irreverence might be compared to, and then pose a question, perhaps to problematize this. So, for lack of a more poetic image, I'm going to suggest that reverent irreverence in religious education in particular is like live yeast for baking bread. It's a catalyst. It's the ferment that gives life to all the other ingredients. On its own, yeast really is nothing. But when it's joined with the flour and water, it creates the dough necessary for good bread. And so too with reverent irreverence and good teaching. So a final question, and this is one where hope again enters into it. Can reverent irreverence, such as I've described briefly of Rabbi Gilman, and I hope as well for me with my students, can it be taught? Is there a lesson plan? Is there a procedure? I confess, I'm not sure, and I'm really troubled by that uncertainty. This is only the beginning of my thinking on the subject. But what I will say for now is that more than any technique, although Rabbi Gilman models a lot of methods very, very beautifully in his courses, and I try to do that as well with my students, that this idea of reverent irreverence, this practice of reverent irreverence, is really taught, is really transmitted by giving a part of one's self, of one's personhood to our students, at least to those who are open to receiving it. And how does that happen? For each one of us as educators, it's a very distinct process. And I'm really struck by the mystery that abides in such transference from the teacher to the student. I also acknowledge that these observations here are perhaps confounding and frustrating for the plans of social science research, when we sometimes are tempted to reduce things to quantifiable techniques. At the same time, I really do believe that in all of our religious traditions, that sense of a lineage, from mother to child, from teacher to student, that concept is crucial to this notion of passing on reverent irreverence, and that the transformative power that is generated by that is a hope-giving enterprise for the world that we are living in, to pass on that sense of holding paradox in both of our hands as we teach. And that it's that breathing of life into our students, and they breathe it back on the other end. I believe it's a reciprocal process, is a life-giving process and an inspirational process, and that is fundamentally what makes it a hopeful endeavor. Thank you.
I just want to thank the conference organisers, the board, and everyone here and my colleagues. It's a great honour for me to participate in this conversation. And I think we all know that academics love talking about their own research interests. And I think it's wonderfully brave and honest to invite us to talk about these things. Because research is a process behind which at every stage stands the personal biographer of the researcher. And I'd like to illustrate this with a story from my childhood. This building is at the end of my street. It's famous for its truncated spire. And the builders of this church wanted to build something a lot taller and then realized they'd got the calculations wrong. Now, whenever I go back here, my parents live just down the road from this church. I always see it as some kind of metaphor for the entire village. Because I had a paper round when I was 13, and I think you have paper rounds in the States. I don't know elsewhere. It's a way of getting children to deliver papers. And I didn't last very long at the job, actually, because I was delivering papers to the wrong addresses, not deliberately, but I think I fared a lot better in academia, but anyway, I'll leave you to judge that. But one day, I set out early in the morning to deliver papers, and as I was delivering papers around the entire village, I could smell smoke. And I thought, somebody's had a bonfire or barbecue or something, but then I could smell it around the whole village. And it wasn't until I had just finished my paper round and came back towards my street, and I noticed there were two fire engines parked next to this medieval church, with their hoses running up into the church, and actually the belfry was on fire. And what had happened, and I won't mention the child's name, although it has just come back to me. I couldn't remember it before. But one of my colleagues from school, another student from the school that I went to, had actually gone into the church and set fire to the belfry. And this student was also somebody who bullied me. And he bullied me because my parents professed an evangelical form of Christianity. And I only remembered this story when I started writing this article, which is reported experiences of anti-Christian prejudice among Christian adolescents. And I spent 2 years going around faith communities in England, trying to understand the experiences of students who participated regularly in a religious community and also went to a regular school. And then I realized, oh, I thought I was doing something useful for society, but actually it was all about me. So I want to talk about scholarship for hope-oriented teaching, because I've been enormously privileged to be able to conduct some research, and I was really lucky to be able to go back into the classroom and teach again after spending 6 years in Oxford, just researching with my head in a book, and also interviewing young people. So I think that research helps us as teachers in many ways. It helps us understand the subject content, and you all know this, but I'll just go through it very quickly and then I'll try and find some other stories to tell you. But it helps us understand subject content. It helps us see the complexity of any example, because we can't study everything in detail, but once we've studied one thing, we just know what massive problems there are trying to understand anything in all its complexity. And it helps generate the capacity of mind to negotiate literature on that subject and other subjects. And of course, research about teaching, I hope as an educational researcher, informs better teaching. But the point I want to make, really, I think, in this presentation, is that being research active builds a scholarly community. And I think this is really, really, really important. And I've used the term paradigm shift from the philosophy of science. I use this in a very broad sense, but there are many scholars, and we're all using similar kinds of methods. And then at some point, things move on a little bit, and then we start using those kinds of methods and those ways of thinking. And I think that's what happens. But that can only happen if we have people engaged in research, and not only engaged in research, but passing on that knowledge and those skills to others. And the thing I would like to emphasize is what we could call the scholarly virtues. And there's a wonderful paper about what virtues we need as scholars. Being honest, being generous, all of these things which Bert was talking about, the qualities of a good teacher, we need to inculcate those things and pass those things on to other researchers. And I'm extremely grateful to the professors and the people who gave me their time to help me become a researcher. And I just want to remember, I'm just going to give you a few examples. And Terence Copley, and when I was thinking of Terence Copley, he was my mentor in Oxford originally before he sadly died. And I was really pleased when I Googled him, he came up on the Religious Education Association website here, a memorial to him. Because he was a man who inspired hope, but was also willing to ask difficult questions. And he really inspired me, and I was very, very, thinking about passing on things through the generations. I was very, very, very honored when his son called me and asked if I wanted all his books. I now have Terence Copley's books, which is absolutely wonderful, because I can even see, it was sort of like walking into his mind, because I could see where he bookmarked things and things he'd underlined, and I still use them regularly. But something else peculiar happened to me at Oxford as well, and that was moving from Protestant tradition to in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. And I have some pictures of my confirmation in the Easter Vigil, and you can see me there looking a bit younger, I hope. But what's been interesting is straddling these two traditions, growing up in a sort of evangelical tradition and then moving denominations. It has been a very interesting tension. And one of my interests is Tolstoy. And this is a short introduction I wrote to Tolstoy's educational thought. And I have another paper just coming out in the Journal of Ecclesiastical History, where I argue, convincingly of course, that Tolstoy wasn't really Russian at all, he was British. If you want to argue about that, you'll have to read my article. But because Tolstoy had a lot of connections with British and American Unitarians, and towards the end of his life, he was quoting thinkers such as Channing and saying, "This is what I really believe." And this has been sort of lost, partly because of the problems of interpreting Tolstoy's work in the Soviet era. That's been rather fun, because I have always, whenever I read a text by Tolstoy, he persuades me so much. And I won't go into this. This is just such a fantastic picture. That when it was displayed, caused mass devotions in Russia and was actually eventually banned. But my interest in Tolstoy's universalism actually led me to attempt to lead the worship in this Universalist chapel in Somerville College, Oxford. And I was called the chapel director, which was very confusing to everybody in Oxford, because everybody in Oxford's Anglican. So they'd always sort of say, "Where's the chaplain?" And then it would be me in a nonconformist chapel as a Roman Catholic. God has a sense of humour, absolutely. And this is a picture of the chapel. It's absolutely beautiful place, and if you are in Oxford, do go into Somerville College, because it is the only one of the only chapels there which is not Anglican, and it is really, really fascinating. Margaret Thatcher there's a memorial to Margaret Thatcher down at the end, and lots of other very, very important figures in the emancipation of women, and female contributions to philosophy, such as Elizabeth Anscombe and Philippa Foot. But I found this, I'm going to be honest, I found this really difficult, because we wanted to have an interdenominational space in a place with such strong Anglican traditions, and my own position, it was very challenging, but we had a lot of fun, and the students got really involved. But I decided that I might be better off being in an all-Catholic environment, and that's why I ended up in the University of Navarra, Pamplona. And when I first went there, I saw the university and I saw the town from air, and I thought it was really, really beautiful. And that's why I was there. But I just want to talk about one of the conversations that I had at the Religious Education Association in 2013, because I think opportunities like this, they're only 2 or 3 days long, but the conversations resonate in our minds for much longer. And because of my experiences of sort of with this very complex interdenominational task that I had here, and then other issues that surround the place, which is much more focused on one tradition. I wanted to write an article in response to a discussion I had here about applying British-style religious education to American schools. And this is an article which has made me very unpopular with people in Britain, called Doubts About Religious Education in Public Schooling. I didn't write it to give a certainty. I just wrote it to say there are arguments why religious education might not be a good thing in public schools. schooling, and they relate back to that first story that I told you, and that other article I told you about, the religious about anti-religious prejudice, because not only Christians suffer from these prejudices in public space. So, I'm going to move on to my conclusion, trying to draw these things together. I have no wisdom in me is a true reproach. And the reason of it is this: that God compels me to act as a midwife. And thinking about these conversations, thinking about the impact of our mentors, and thinking about developing a scholarly community, this really powerful metaphor of being a midwife, of not stating what is true, but trying to allow others to search for and fight for those and strive for those for knowledge is the essence. And I think that's where we find hope. And that's hope as humility. That's epistemological humility. That's allowing for others to take the debate further, to take discussion further. And that's relational humility. That is giving time to our students. That is listening to them. That is not assuming we're always right. And when I looked up this quotation to put it in this PowerPoint, I'd forgotten that there's the theological aspect, and it's the God that compels Socrates. And I think here we see an example of theological humility as well. Thank you for listening.
Hello to you all. Wow. Great to be here. Teachers are lazy sots. Former Chancellor Schröder said during the electoral campaign for the German Bundestag, in order to win votes from the population. My neighbors.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Yeah, okay. My neighbors like to say that one should become a teacher in summer for the long holidays, and a construction worker in winter, because then construction work comes to standstill due to bad weather. Students of the medicine or legal studies faculties often comment that anyone who fails his or her studies becomes a teacher, and whoever fails even this becomes a teacher of religion. But I am a teacher, even a teacher of religion. Yes, I am, which even exacerbates the situation, a teacher of Catholic religion. For some, this might sound like a disease. For others, like an exotic species. Unlike Finland and Germany, the teaching profession does not enjoy a high standing. So why have I become a teacher? To be honest, not by vocation. I did not hear any call, did not feel any specific pedagogical arrows within me. I wanted to become a journalist and study history. Thanks to a friend, I came to my second subject, Catholic theology. Collaterally, I have studied educational sciences and philosophy. And as it turns out, sometimes the second love becomes the first. Real passion. After my studies and my theological doctorate on salvation and the work of Karl Rahner and Franz Rosenzweig, in other words, the most important Catholic think of the 20th century, and Franz Rosenzweig, the fascinating Jewish thinker, I went to school because I had to feed the family of 4. I tested my first lessons of my 3-year-old daughter, Lea. This was 20 years ago now. For 8 years I taught Catholic religion and history at a grammar school. At the same time I taught courses at university and submitted my habilitation, that means my second book, in which I developed a theory of alterity on religious experience and provided as the theoretical foundation for religious education. And I can tell you, the more time I spent with children, the more time I spent disputing with young people's problems. For instance, in my first class as a primary responsible classroom teacher, the more clearly I felt an emergence of interest, even fascination, even enthusiasm for the teaching profession. My studies and teaching seminar had not prepared me for most of it. How do I organize a parents' evening? How do I deal with sexuality between adolescents in a youth hostel, drug consumption, aggressions? Even though I have dealt with homeless people for many years during my studies and was thus used to difficult situations, including physical disputes, many things were totally new to me. Back then, one of my colleagues said that in order to be a good teacher, you have to love children. That is true. The teaching profession's burden can easily be underestimated. One has to be careful not to inflate the teaching profession with an idealism which, as recent research tells us, can only frustrate teachers and let them up with burnout. It is one of the most demanding professions known. Thereby, it is characterized by a deep, yet not always visible tension. Being a teacher means orientation along the method, the curriculum, the administration, the school system, the school's main purpose to distribute life chances, to prepare for the role in society, and certify this through grades. I call this aspect the profession's technocratic aspect. In addition to this, however, there is the attentiveness towards the students, towards each and every one. This I call the humanist aspect. I believe to have a good relationship with my university students, but I miss the school students up until this day. The contact to them was closer than can be the case in a major university. For more than 12 years, since 2004, I have been a university professor for religious education. Since 2013, I've been professor in Bochum. Thus, I can judge both aspects, being a teacher and a professor for religious education fairly well. What does it mean now regarding my professional self-conception as a university professor? To some extent, I have to deal with a similar tension, the tension between the technocratic and the humanistic trait of my profession. I have to stick to the curriculum, have to assign grades, which have an even higher significance than in school. Apart from that, I have to deal with concrete students, with their concrete hopes, hardships, fears, social problems, which are particularly great in my university's area, the Ruhr area. You have seen a picture this morning from Bert. How difficult is it to have to hold these two aspects together? Add to that my scientific research, which is related to my doctorate. Another specific Catholic matter has to be added. Being a Catholic theologian, one is bound to the magisterium, not only to the scientific freedom. Thus it is likely to occur as with colleagues of the University of Regensburg, that's the bishop, Cardinal Müller now, threatens with the withdrawal of the magisterium because they signed a petition for more liberty within church. Consequently, under this one stress to satisfy the system, the church on the one hand, and to satisfy the entrusted students in their own research on the other hand. Here now my theology and biography meet, the theory and my teaching beliefs. To an extent, I comprehend this as an emergency and practical test of my theory of alterity. After all, this is what this theory is precisely about, only on an abstract level, the general and the special, to hold unity and diversity together in a way that makes it possible to appreciate them and make cross-references critically and productively. I have to take the other seriously. After all, I am entrusted to him. Yes, he entrusted himself to me, to put it in Levinas terms. If I try to convert the other into my conceptual scheme, I had already lost him. This by no means denies the relative inherent logic of didactic settings and the requirements of the technocratic aspects. They do make sense, after all. I have to try to understand the other, I have to try to enter a dialogue with him, have to meet him pedagogically. But this I can only do because I ultimately assume that I am met with the unconditional by the other, with God, and that I am liberated by God in advance, invoked in each encounter, learning in the face of the other, as Bert phrases it, means learning from my students, recognizing them as someone who uses theologically actively in an empathic sense. But as a teacher, it also means to let oneself be led by the other's encouragement and to experience oneself as liberated. Only then an option for the suffering other, for the desperate student in my office hours who learns a serious diagnosis, or for the suffering student who lost her husband after a sudden stroke and is now alone with the newborn child, is possible. Maybe the kenotic aspect of the profession to be a teacher or professor of religion, with their trust upon the unexpected event of the other's experience, always counts on more than can ever be designed didactically, operationalized, and evaluated, lies in this tension. Maybe this connection between theology and biography is based on a transcendence downwards, towards the individual in this particular situation of learning. Everything else, as Theodor Adorno said, remains a piece of technology. Thank you.
For better visuals, I'm inviting the panelists if you could move your chairs and be like over here in the center of the room a little bit so that colleagues in the back there will be able to see you. As I invite them to think about perhaps a word, an image, a metaphor of one another's presentations to connect to respond to your presentation. Yeah, we'll be able to see you by video and back there better.
Yeah, because this wall is
The walls and move. Imagine yourself in a coffee shop. Okay, we've got 2 mics here. I'd like to. Have you thoughts about one another? I just wanted to give you that opportunity to respond to each other first before I open the floor.
Wow, that was great to hear each other's stories and the thoughts and ideas that flow from one's personal narratives. So this question of teachers being comfortable with their worldviews, that caught my attention. would you like to comment on that, because it came out of your discussion? Well, I'm really curious.
Thank you, Sarah. This is what I'm thinking of for many years with my experience with my students in the teacher training department. When they come up to the graduation stage, as I showed a picture, this was one of their last days in school. They become always worried. Oh, if the students ask me questions which I do not know, or they say, if I will learn many theories or many techniques, will they work or not? Always they worry about the technical things. My concern is to attract their attention to their inner life, to their inner journey, to ask themselves, what do I want when I enter in the classroom or take a speech at mosque or wherever? I am responsible to speak about Islam because our students graduate on the Islamic theology. The most important message, what should be, and what is my, let's say, you said midwife, as a servant or as God's helpers. I love this statement always. I use it with my students at the classroom and say, please ask yourself, what is your role? What is your mission in this world? Why are you here? And when you enter the classroom, what would be your expectation from your students? You said when students are ready, then the teacher disappears. So they complain about students, but they forget themselves and they forget their inner world. So this is what I am trying to attract my students' attention and also myself to be, yes, to learn more from their professors, but also to try to build their inner world with their own faith. So this is what I say at the moment. Thank you.
It's a huge issue in the training of teachers in Britain, in what's known as non-confessional religious education, the position of the teacher. And it's somewhat under-researched and in my opinion, not very well thought out aspect, because it is actually the most important thing to many students is what actually does this teacher think themselves. It's very challenging to trainee teachers to know how to position themselves across all kinds of controversial issues which they're told they have to teach as controversial. You see, and then they ask the students, well, what do you think about the existence of God? Here's reasons for, here's reasons against, what do you think? And of course, why should we ask a question to students we're not prepared to answer ourselves? So that's one of the arguments in my article, doubts about religious education in public schooling.
But in Germany, even in the Catholic sphere, or nearly also in the Protestant sphere, it's a really demanding thing. What happens if you lose your faith? Could you be still a Catholic teacher, a teacher for Catholic religion? I like very much what you have said about the ambiguity of religion. And I think in this point, this dimension of the eschatological expectance is very important, and maybe a kind of hope also. And so I think we have to do a lot of research about this teacher beliefs and the connection between these special teacher beliefs in religious education and the teacher beliefs in the other subjects.
We've got a good bit of time for some interaction with the panel. So are there questions that I may invite you to ask? I'm here just because I
asking you the question that kind of gave you a meltdown in front of your colleagues there. Were you talking about teachers being able to crack through to authenticity, or were you talking about a mindfulness with the students, teaching that towards research? If you could go into your experience a little bit more, that would be helpful.
Let me say that this is an idea that I've been turning over for many years now, reverent irreverence, and how it plays out in both preparing students to become religious educators of various kinds, whether that means clergy who are going to be teachers along with being preachers and pastors, or people who are preparing to be educators without having a clergy title attached or an identity. I think it works on a both and in what you had just said. It's the ability to, the teacher who's teaching to ask oneself the difficult, ambiguous questions, to face the texts, the traditions that are complex, often problematic, don't have easy answers, and yet to approach them with that sense that there is still spirit, sanctity in them, even as we may struggle, or especially when we struggle. And that's very much counter to sometimes what people believe religion in particular should do. And so how do we live with that what I call a positive tension? So I don't know if I've answered, and it's that both in the preparation, but also then helping those people to go out into the world, larger world, churches, synagogues, mosques, meditation places, all sorts of places wherever this kind of teaching and learning is happening, and to be able to model that well. We hope well, because reverent irreverence can become cynicism. And we have to be very careful not to have it slide into cynicism.
So I'm putting back here, just the mic will be available back here for questions. Right here.
Hi, Elizabeth Nolan from Queensland, Australia. We developed a number of years ago a process of communicating in religious education in public schools, where we said it was important for teachers to own their own beliefs or ground the beliefs in who owns them and who believes them. And so separating language from belief type, from fact type language, and helping the students to be able to understand those different communication patterns. And I wonder in how you do that teaching in the public schools, how you, as teacher, you believed it was important to acknowledge where we're coming from, and not to try to have that supposed neutrality, but rather to enable the students to see that you embody a faith, but your perspective is also respectful of others. How do you do that in what you're teaching teachers how to teach? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Maybe I can start, because we in Germany, we have this special confessional approach also, of course, in Austria, and it's always difficult to legitimize the existence of this special approach to religious education. We have this idea of teacher as a witness of belief, and so the students could learn from this teacher as a witness for his belief and his faith what it means to have a position, which one should bring into a discourse, and for one is responsible for, and that isn't really an easy thing, especially in a postmodern society. And so it's really a task.
Yeah, I think your approach sounds wonderful, and I think this is very much related to patterns of secularization, and I can't speak about Australia, but I think 30 years ago in England this kind of approach was used, and I was teaching in a confessional school, and I'm in the confessional school. Officially, the religious education teacher has to be of, or can be, of that faith and can believe that faith and can teach that faith, almost like catechesis. But actually, in reality, a lot of those church schools, as they're known, or faith schools, actually cater for students, very, very religiously diverse body of students. For example, there's a school in Oxford which is a Catholic school which has a majority of Muslim students. And so the teachers and the chaplain are Catholic and the students are Muslim. And the reason why it's popular is because the parents don't want to send their children to a secular school. And they perceive the school as a very good school. But obviously it raises big issues about compulsory attendance at maths, for example. So I think there's contextual issues here. But in the regular school, which isn't affiliated to a religious denomination, I think it's very difficult for teachers to profess their faith openly and deal with the curriculum content. And I just want to give you an example of one 11-year-old boy that I was teaching who, after a module in about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, he came from a very, his family were Christian, but the way he was interpreting this module was as though it was a module about Christianity, and I think it is confusing for students, and I don't think things are necessarily received in the way that we think they might be received by every student. And I mean this raises an interesting question about if we're talking about positions, should we be telling the students what positions they should be taking? I mean, it's is religious education like a sweet shop where you take what you like and then declare your own identity? And I remember a similar situation with an official form where one of the students had written he was Buddhist, and the head teacher had taken him aside and told him he wasn't. So, yeah.
Just to add that even in environments that aren't the public school education where you're teaching, this comes up often with my preparation of the rabbinical students and Jewish education students. They feel very deeply and profoundly about certain beliefs, certain practices, and yet they constantly are saying, if teaching prayer class, for example, at what point do I need to hold back from what I feel is so important for them to know and to practice, to allow them the space to give birth to their own understandings and their own beliefs and their own practices. So that question of the holding back versus the sharing is one that exists even when we're all in the quote-unquote same religion and same denomination, for example.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. much. Thank you very much. Oops. That was 3 times. Thank you very much for your biographical notices. I really appreciate that. It's coming from deep, so to say, from deep in the soil of your own backgrounds. My question is, what I perceive in higher education, in teacher education, but also I think in seminaries, is the loss of religious socialization of many of our students. So they become future teachers or future religious educators, but they don't have the connection, vivid connection anymore with their own backgrounds, let's say. They lack the sort of faith experience within their own tradition. How shall we respond to that situation? I find this, think about the nuns as well.
N-O-N-E.
Yes, yeah, the N-O-N-Es, not the kind of nuns, which I presume they could be very well integrated in their tradition. But, yes. But I mean, you know what I mean?
Let me take the mic back.
Yeah, yeah, do that.
Okay, because as I said, the situation in Germany is in a special way demanding for future teachers, and we are well aware of this situation that a lot of students are in our faculty, I mean a Catholic faculty, which weren't really socialized in parishes and in belief and so on. And so they try to raise up an additional program. It's called mentorat, driven by the church, just to bring the students in contact with churches, with liturgy, with practice, with practice in social work and so on. And so this combination of university and praxis in parishes and in social work, I think that's very important.
Anything else?
Well, I can say that we have a little bit of a different scenario, which is that often the students that I have at the seminary, who come from a variety of different backgrounds, Jewish backgrounds, they have been very well socialized, but they go out into communities where there's very episodic affiliation, and they begin to feel that they're very isolated, that their intense socialization is not matched by the socialization of the people whom they are supposed to be teaching and working and living with and for. And how do they not become an isolated caste, especially? So that's a little bit of a different dilemma, but related to socialization.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think this notion of being de-traditioned actually speaks for a lot of and it means we have to completely recalibrate what we're doing, I think.
So we have 2 questions up here, and I will try to alternate between front and back.
Thank you so much for your biographical testimony. It was very nice for me. But the one question that you, Bernhard, asked us is in the air for me. What is if a religious educator lose his belief or whatever? Yes? And if I think on my biography, I think I had a 30 years base in Zen meditation, and I think I changed my belief, what I learned in dogmatic theology. I can't agree on those things, not agree, I will believe or not. Yes, I think this is not so easy. This is the one. And the second is, I think, if we accept the beauty of confessions and religions, that we can do it. Yes, this I learned especially in my spiritual way, because I think that to understand religion, you need the performative aspect. If not, you can't understand. To understand only about religion is not to understand religion. Yes? And so to be confronted with teachers or with women and men who have an experience in religion in a wide area or in a wide space. This seems to me that the most important for religion education.
Did you have a quick response to that?
I think the question goes directly to me, so I try to answer. This thesis was addressed to the situation, especially in our context. And that means if you lose your beliefs, that means, for example, to get divorced as a Catholic teacher, and then if you try to remarry, you will lose your job. And I was, as you know, I was in school, and I learned some strategies of colleagues to deal with it. To deal with this factor, to go in a deep conflict with the church, but on the other hand, to feel that their own belief, it's not always a matter of dogma, but it's not only on the level of poor spirituality. I think it's more. Belief and faith is more than spirituality in this one sense. And there were different strategies to deal with this, to cope this really difficult situation. And of course, we in Germany, we have the advantage that we are state employed. And then these colleagues went to the principal and said, no, I don't want to teach religion anymore. And so, in my case, I would teach history all day long. It would be very nice because I love history, but it's a deep loss, I think, for the teacher, for the students, and also for religious education. And that's the task of this special agreement and the special design we have of religious education in Germany.
We have a question down here.
Thank you all for your biographical sketches that you shared with us. My name is Betty Taylor. I'm a PhD student at Fordham University. And I'm very interested to know from any of you that would like to share. On Tuesdays, you know, in this country, we are going to get a very good grip and glimpse and portrait of what we are as Americans collectively. And to the extent that the theological informs the political, I was wondering if you would share your how does your sacramental imagination inform your political imagination?
There you are.
Maybe I can start because I'm from Germany. And as I started my lecture, I remind you on our former Chancellor Schröder, and as you could see, he also tried to go into this sphere of populism and this kind of dealing with very important matters. In my personal opinion, and I'm a student of Johann Baptist Metz, and Johann Baptist Metz was the founder of the new political theology. So for me, it's not possible to divide religion and politics. I've wrote a book about religious education and politics, and I try to bring them together. But the task is, and the most important thing is, how they do relate. And in my opinion, it's not a kind of domination. It's a kind of, must be a kind of discourse. It must be a kind of discourse in the sphere of the public rationality, and this discourse must also happen in school, even in the religious educational class. And so, when you ask me, as I were in school now, I would of course go into a discourse about this election in my religious educational class, to come in a discussion with my students and bring in my view as my view, but the students, of course, has their right to bring in their views.
Thank you so much for your question. It's wonderful to be a political commentator on something other than Brexit, which is absolute idiocy, and that isn't an opinion, that is fact. And I don't know if you've seen the newspapers today, which has pictures of 3 judges who ruled that it was unconstitutional for the Brexit to go ahead without Parliament voting. And the newspaper, which all the old people read, called the Daily Mail, had said that these people were enemies of the people. And this is just the doublethink and huge lies which have surrounded this whole affair, because of course the Parliament is the democratic body of the people, and this vote should go through Parliament. And this is, but unfortunately, people buy this kind of stuff, and it's very, very sad. I was in this church over here. I forget its name. There's a Catholic church just right next door. And at the end of Mass, the priest said that they were going to have an exposition, the Blessed Sacrament, on Tuesday, in order to pray for the leaders of the country. I didn't know what they were saying, because in the cathedral, I saw a leaflet which was a simple table, and it said Trump Clinton, and it had supposedly picked out what was important for Christians. Which included what was going to happen about ISIS. So what they had said about ISIS, single-sex marriage, abortion, and what they both said. Just a little quotation. And I found myself deeply uncomfortable with this, because it seemed that the church was in a way taking sides, and I really don't know. So that's all I'm going to say. But I want to hear what you think about that.
I can speak only from my own context, my own country. I'm coming from Turkey, and in recent months we experienced unpleasant and unexpected and many things in this situation. Before this event, this horrible event, we always were thinking about the separation of religion and state, and we were talking about the misuse of religion, and also the monopoly discourse that when the religious people and Muslim, let's say imams or the teachers, when they enter into the education circle, that they have the only truth. But we were looking before this event for a place, a common place, coming up religiously, as in your topic, Sibran, remember we discussed it too much, that everyone could enter to the public space with its own voice. Is it possible or not? But for when we separate religion and state and create a space for religion, and the state becomes as neutral as possible, I think that I can speak for Islam. I think that people who are responsible to govern or to rule the state can rule it with their Muslim identity. For this, yes, but not in the name of Islam or in the name of any religion. This is the problem we are experiencing in our country, and now we are talking about mostly with our students at university about the misuse of religion and using religion as a power in the common place or common sphere. So when you use religion as a power in the common sphere, this question comes up: which interpretation? You monopolize one interpretation and try to dictate it to the public. This is horrible in the name of religion. So religion, yes, it is not easy to separate it, but we can try to work for a dialogue for the social aspect and the individual aspect of the religion, and the state should be neutral as possible, as possible. Yes. That's what I just thought about. Thank you.
So one of the great things about being in a group where there's an international participation is that it really reinforces for me that some of the many profound difficulties we're facing in our country, and I'm just speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for anybody else, are part of a world challenges that are being faced in different languages and different distinctive characteristics, but the ground is similar. So we need to listen to each other. So for my own faith commitments, I would say that I return in my own religious tradition to the importance of the sanctity of listening to the inner voice, to the still small voice, to the loud voice, and what does it mean to listen with love rather than hate. That is to me fundamental to my religious tradition. And then also to realize that the dignity of every human being is entrenched at the core of religion, even if it gets, to me, can be distorted by groups that have other agendas in mind. And then finally, especially in Judaism, the greatest commandment is life, and how do we sanctify life? And life, not just the biological life, but the spirit. So in facing these political controversies and hurts, is that how can we respect the fundamental dignity of all human beings and the earth, and then work from that perspective. So that's where I'm trying to lead.
I think that's a great note to end on for this particular session. Well, would you help me thank our panel?